Analysis. Ukraine has 50-50 chance of holding Pokrovsk, but Russia has one upper hand. We've just brought you Volodymyr Zelensky's latest comments on the key city of Pokrovsk. The Ukrainian president says Russia is also trying to demonstrate battlefield success for Donald Trump with its assault on the city. It has been a target of Moscow's for years now, but has so far held. However, recently Moscow's defense ministry has been making claims of progress towards taking the city. In our weekly Q&A with our military analyst Professor Michael Clark, he was asked about the frontline city. Clark said that Bakhmut never had much strategic value to Moscow, despite its forces fighting for the city for more than a year, because the surrounding ground was difficult to launch further assaults from, adding it had more symbolic significance. The difference with Pokrovsk, he explained, is that it's a road and rail hub, making it a genuinely strategic target for both sides. It would also make capturing the key fortress cities of Sloviansk and Kramatorsk easier for Russia. If they take those two northern fortress cities, then they've got the Donbass, which is ultimately what they want to do, Clark said. What's happening in Pokrovsk? Clark said Ukraine believes around 1,000 Russian fighters have infiltrated into central Pokrovsk in small groups. If the Russians can hold these islands of positions and get some armor into them and solidify it, they could force the Ukrainians to withdraw, he explained. He added, however, the Ukrainians have devoted the Azov Brigade, which is probably their best fighting brigade. They've already put them into Pokrovsk and held it, and they look as if they're putting in as many of the elite forces as they can spare from elsewhere. Clark said that Ukraine will need to use urban warfare to eliminate the Russian presence, either by surrounding them or capturing them to make them leave. In a devastated urban landscape, that's a tough job, and only elite forces can really do that. What are the chances Ukraine can hold Pokrovsk? I think Ukrainians have got probably a 50-50 chance of holding on to the city, Clark said. But it's tough for them. It's really tough because they just don't have the numbers. And the Russians have got lots of numbers. There's not much firepower the Russians can put behind the numbers at the moment, but they've got the numbers to get into Pokrovsk, and if they can solidify their position, they will. Russia massing troops in northeastern Kharkiv, Zelensky warns. We're hearing from Volodymyr Zelensky, who has been talking about the latest situation on the battlefield. Zelensky says Russia is massing troops near Vovchansk in the northeastern Kharkiv region. The Ukrainian president says Russia is also trying to demonstrate battlefield success for Donald Trump with its assault on Pokrovsk. We've been telling you about the key battle unfolding in the city, with our military analyst Michael Clark saying Ukraine believes around 1,000 Russian fighters have infiltrated into central Pokrovsk in small groups. If the Russians can hold these islands of positions and get some armor into them and solidify it, they could force the Ukrainians to withdraw, he explained. Asked about the chances of Ukraine being able to hold Pokrovsk, Clark said they have a 50-50 chance. But it's tough for them. It's really tough because they just don't have the numbers, he explained. And the Russians have got lots of numbers. Ukraine intensifying assaults on town to ease pressure on embattled strategic hub. Ukraine's top general has said Kyiv's troops are stepping up assaults on Russian forces around the eastern Ukrainian town of Dobrapilya to ease pressure on the embattled hub of Pokrovsk. Oleksandr Syrsky also said Ukrainian forces were broadly focused on securing lines of logistics and pushing Russian troops out of urban buildings. We continue to liberate and clear territories, which forces the enemy to disperse forces and makes it impossible to concentrate the main efforts in the Pokrovsk area, he said. Pokrovsk had a pre-war population of around 60,000 people, but most civilians have long since fled its ruins. Capturing it could give Moscow a platform to drive towards Kramatorsk and Sloviansk, the two biggest remaining Ukrainian-controlled cities in the Donetsk region, which Russia wants to capture in its entirety. Almost 1,500 African citizens fighting in Russia's army, Ukraine says. The issue of North Koreans being sent to fight alongside Moscow's forces in the war following the invasion of Ukraine is well documented. Perhaps less well known is the significant numbers of people from Africa who have been enlisted to join Russia's war effort. According to Andriy Sybiha, Ukraine's Minister of Foreign Affairs, at least 1,436 citizens from 36 African countries are currently fighting in the ranks of Russia's invasion army in Ukraine. He said that number represents those identified, though the actual number could be higher. Russia recruits nationals of African countries using a variety of methods, he said. Some are offered money, while others are duped and do not realize what they are signing up for or are forced to do so under duress. He said signing a contract to join Russia's forces was equivalent to signing a death sentence. Foreign citizens in the Russian army have a sad fate, he said. Most of them are immediately sent to the so-called meat assaults, where they are quickly killed. The Russian command understands that there will be no accountability for the killed foreigner, so they are treated as second-rate, expendable human material. Most mercenaries do not survive more than a month. Sybiha urged people not to sign any documents with Russian authorities and called on all African governments to issue public statements warning their citizens against joining the Russian army. Fighting for Russia in its war of aggression against Ukraine is illegal, immoral, and violates the UN Charter and international law, he said. He added that anyone who had already done so and been deployed to the front lines should look for any opportunity to desert and become a prisoner of war. We treat POWs in accordance with all international humanitarian law standards, he said. Ukrainian captivity provides a ticket to life and the possibility of returning to your home country. Germany setting up rapid response team to counter drone threats. We have been reporting on disruption in Belgium this week after a series of drone sightings near airports and military bases. As we have detailed, they follow months of similar incidents across Europe, with many analysts suggesting Russia is likely to be behind the flights as part of its hybrid warfare against countries supporting Ukraine. Moscow has denied any connection with the incidents. Anti-drone units. Today, a top military official in Germany said the country was setting up rapid response teams to counter acute drone threats, with the experts having recently been sent to assist authorities in Belgium. These anti-drone units are being established right now, said Lieutenant General Alexander Solfrank, who heads Germany's Joint Operations Command and oversees the country's defense planning. The German Defense Ministry said late yesterday it was sending counter-drone experts to Belgium after a request from the country, which has been struggling with an increase in drone sightings near military installations and civilian airports. It said, an advance party of Air Force personnel have arrived in Belgium to explore the situation and coordinate a temporary mission involving drone detection and counter-drone capabilities with the Belgian forces. The main party will follow shortly. Sightings of drones over airports and military bases have become a constant problem in Belgium in recent days and have caused major disruptions across Europe in recent months. Some officials have blamed the incidents on hybrid warfare by Russia. Moscow has denied any connection with the incidents. Solfrank declined to go into detail when talking about the new counter-drone units, citing operational security, but said a team sent to Copenhagen last month during an EU summit had been equipped with a mix of sensors and effectors. He said, they have various systems to spot and counter drones. We have the option, for example, to assume control over a drone and land it at a specific location. The counter-drone experts also have drones at their disposal that can eject nets to catch drones and thus take them down, as well as interceptors that ram hostile drones, he added. What's been happening in Belgium? Belgium's Liege airport resumed flights after a temporary halt due to a drone sighting on Friday, in the second such incident this week. Drones spotted flying over airports in the capital, Brussels, and in Liege, in the country's east, forced the diversion of many incoming planes and the grounding of some due to depart on Tuesday. The Belgian government called an emergency meeting of key government ministers and security chiefs on Thursday to address what the defense minister called a coordinated attack. Concern across Europe. It comes after a week in which drone sightings over airports and military bases have caused major disruption in Belgium, following months of similar incidents around Europe. Germany's Munich airport was forced to suspend operations twice in 24 hours last month after unconfirmed sightings. And a number of drones were also seen over Danish and Norwegian civilian airports and military installations in September. Electricity switched back on for 170,000 homes after blackouts caused by Russian attacks. Officials say they have returned electricity to 170,000 households in Ukraine's southeastern Dnipropetrovsk region. The homes were left without power after overnight Russian drone strikes on energy infrastructure. Ukrainian energy provider DTK added that 373 settlements had been hit by the blackouts, but that utility workers had returned electricity to all critical infrastructure and most residential consumers by afternoon. EU announces stricter visa rules for Russians after acts of sabotage and airport drone disruption. The European Union has announced stricter visa rules for Russian nationals in light of what it calls the weaponization of migration, acts of sabotage, and potential misuse of visas. Russian nationals will no longer be eligible for multiple entry visas and must apply for a new visa each time they travel to the EU, a statement from the European Commission read. It said the aim was to protect public policy and security. There will be limited exceptions for dissidents, independent journalists, and human rights defenders. Starting a war and expecting to move freely in Europe is hard to justify, EU Foreign Policy Chief Kaja Kallas said. The EU is tightening visa rules for Russian nationals amid continued drone disruptions and sabotage on European soil. Traveling to the EU is a privilege, not a given. It comes after a week in which drone sightings over airports and military bases have caused major disruption in Belgium, following months of similar incidents around Europe. Germany's Munich airport was forced to suspend operations twice in 24 hours last month after unconfirmed sightings. And a number of drones were also seen over Danish and Norwegian civilian airports and military installations in September. Ukraine says it has carried out long-range drone strike on petrochemical plant in Russia. Ukrainian forces have carried out a long-range drone strike on a petrochemical plant in Russia's Bashkortostan region, Kyiv's military intelligence agency said today. In a statement, it said the attack on the Sterly Tamak plant yesterday sparked a fire in a part of the facility that produces an additive for aviation fuel. Russia speaks out after key Putin ally says it will sell ammunition to EU. The Russian Foreign Ministry has called on Belgrade to clarify remarks by Serbian President Aleksandar Vučić regarding the potential sale of ammunition to the European Union amid concerns in Moscow that the shipments might reach Ukraine. In a recent interview with German magazine Cicero, Vučić was cited as saying that Serbia was ready to sell ammunition to European partners, even if the weapons ultimately ended up in Ukraine. Russian Foreign Ministry spokeswoman Maria Zakharova said Vučić's comments required explanation from Belgrade, noting that Serbia had promised Russia many times that its ammo would not end up in Ukrainian hands. Serbia has continued to maintain close political and economic ties with Russia, refusing to join Western sanctions against Moscow. It also still imports Russian gas under a 3-year agreement signed last month. Moscow responds to rumors Putin has fallen out with one of Kremlin's most senior figures. The Kremlin has denied that Vladimir Putin has fallen out with one of his most long-standing and loyal aides, Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov. A report in the Moscow Times said the source of the rift between the pair was a disastrous call Lavrov had with U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio, which happened just before Washington ordered sanctions on Russia's biggest 2 oil firms and canceled a planned meeting between Putin and Donald Trump. The newspaper reported that Lavrov was not present for Wednesday's meeting of Russia's Security Council, despite being a permanent member. Reuters and Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov announced yesterday that Lavrov would not, as has typically been the case, head the Russian delegation at the forthcoming G20 summit. Peskov said the decision to instead appoint Maxim Orshkin, deputy chief of staff of the presidential administration, was made by Putin. However, in his daily briefing with reporters this morning, Peskov dismissed speculation of a falling out between Putin and Lavrov. He said such suggestions do not correspond to reality, and insisted Lavrov continued to carry out his duties as foreign minister. Lavrov, who is 75, has been foreign minister since 2004, the longest serving in that post since the Soviet era. Russia claims it has captured Ukrainian village. The Russian Defense Ministry says its forces have taken control of the village of Uspanivka in Ukraine's southeastern Zaporizhzhia region. It's no more than 100 kilometers southwest of the fighting over the key city of Pokrovsk. The battlefield report has not been independently verified. Swiss company drops plan to buy Russian firm's foreign assets after U.S. Treasury labels it Kremlin's puppet. Swiss commodity trader Gunvor announced this morning it had withdrawn its proposal to buy foreign assets of Russian energy company Lukoil after the U.S. Treasury called it Russia's puppet and signaled Washington opposed the deal. The move thwarts what would have been Gunvor's largest acquisition and underscores Washington's attempt to use sanctions to isolate Russia and choke revenues it uses to fight the war in Ukraine. The U.S. Treasury said in a post on X that Donald Trump has been clear that the war must end immediately. As long as Putin continues the senseless killings, the Kremlin's puppet, Gunvor, will never get a license to operate and profit. Seth Pietras, Gunvor's corporate affairs director, said the Treasury statement was fundamentally misinformed and false, and it welcomed the opportunity to ensure this clear misunderstanding is corrected. In the meantime, Gunvor withdraws its proposal for Lukoil's international assets, Pietras said. The Treasury imposed sanctions on Lukoil last month in an effort to cut Russia's revenues used in fighting the war. After the Treasury imposed sanctions on Russia's second-largest oil company in October, Lukoil said it had accepted an offer from Gunvor to buy its foreign assets. The assets include refineries in Europe, shares in oil fields in Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Iraq, and Mexico, and hundreds of retail fuel stations around the world. The Treasury's input on the deal is important because it can issue licenses or waivers, allowing transactions related to the sanctions. Even before the withdrawal, bankers and insiders said Gunvor's biggest acquisition target to date would be difficult to complete because it was far beyond the commodity traders' borrowing capacity. The Treasury imposed sanctions on Lukoil last month in an effort to cut Russia's revenues used in fighting the war. After the Treasury imposed sanctions on Russia's second-largest oil company in October, Lukoil said it had accepted an offer from Gunvor to buy its foreign assets. The assets include refineries in Europe, shares in oil fields in Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Iraq, and Mexico, and hundreds of retail fuel stations around the world. The Treasury's input on the deal is important because it can issue licenses or waivers, allowing transactions related to the sanctions. Even before the withdrawal, bankers and insiders said Gunvor's biggest acquisition target to date would be difficult to complete because it was far beyond the commodity traders' borrowing capacity. The fear of this outcome is what led to Vladimir Putin calling Trump the most recent time to talk him down, Clark said. He added he doesn't think Trump will change his mind and suspects he's trying to get out of the war. Options. But that isn't game over for Ukraine, as there are substitutes for Tomahawk missiles. These are British Storm Shadow missiles, Ukrainian-made Flamingo missiles. Clark said that if Ukraine is able to bolster its manufacturing ability of Flamingo missiles, then that could do the job that they're presently thinking Tomahawks might do. He said, so Ukraine, they can hang on if this war goes into next summer, the Ukrainians might find that they've got really quite a big advantage in the ability to produce flamingos. But you can bet your life the Russians are looking for production sites with all of the aerial bombings, which is why some elements are now being produced in Europe to help them. But the Russians will be desperate to stop Flamingo going into really big production. Positive talks with U.S. for missiles, says Ukrainian envoy. Weapons imports are essential to Ukraine's defense, with Kyiv lobbying allies in the West for a continued supply. Top of their wish list is U.S.-made Tomahawk missiles, which have a significantly longer range and could hit Russian targets well beyond the Ukrainian border regions. While Donald Trump has played down the chances of Ukraine being equipped with the missiles, the country's ambassador to the U.S. had a more upbeat update on its general procurement efforts. It is not only Tomahawks, but different types of other long-range and short-range missiles, and I can only say that it's rather positive, Ol Stefanishina told Bloomberg. As recently as Sunday, Trump said that, for now, he is not considering a deal for Ukraine to use Tomahawk missiles against Russia. Belgian airport resumes flights after another drone sighting grounded takeoffs. In the second such incident this week, Belgium's Liege airport grounded flights briefly this morning after another drone sighting. Air traffic controllers said it received a report of a drone spotted over the airport at around 6:30 a.m. UK time, forcing the closure for about 30 minutes. We have to take every report seriously, spokesman Kurt Verwilligen said. Drones spotted over airports in the capital Brussels and in Liege, in the country's east, forced the diversion of incoming planes and the grounding of some due to depart on Tuesday. Drone sightings over airports and military bases have been a constant problem over recent days and have caused major disruptions across Europe over the past few months. Just yesterday, Gothenburg Landvetter Airport on Sweden's west coast halted traffic after at least one drone was sighted. Police said that report was made at 4:41 p.m. UK time. Some officials have blamed these incidents on hybrid warfare by Russia, something Moscow denies. The Belgian government called an emergency meeting yesterday to address what the defense minister called a coordinated attack. In pictures, drone attack on Ukrainian city. There was another wave of drone attacks in Ukraine overnight, a daily occurrence in its war against Russia's full-scale invasion. These are the latest images since those attacks, showing fires and damage in Kyiv, a city in the Kharkiv region. Russia capable of attacking NATO as early as tomorrow, warns German general. Russia could attack NATO territory in a limited way at any time, a top German military official has warned. If you look at Russia's current capabilities and combat power, Russia could kick off a small-scale attack against NATO territory as early as tomorrow, Lieutenant General Alexander Salfrank said. Small, quick, regionally limited, nothing big. Russia is too tied down in Ukraine for that. Salfrank heads Germany's Joint Operations Command and oversees defense planning. He echoed NATO warnings Russia could potentially mount a large-scale assault on the 32-member alliance as early as 2029. Vladimir Putin denies plans to that end, insisting Moscow's full-scale invasion of Ukraine was actually in defense against NATO's expansion. Despite its setbacks in that war in Ukraine, Salfrank said Russia's air force is still strong and its nuclear and missile forces have not been affected. While the Black Sea Fleet has suffered significant losses, other Russian fleets have not been reduced, he added. The ground forces are suffering losses, but Russia says it aims to boost its total troop numbers to 1.5 million soldiers, he said. And Russia has enough main battle tanks to make a limited attack conceivable as early as tomorrow. But there are three factors that will determine whether Russia will decide to attack or not. These are Russia's military strength, its military track record, and its leadership. These three factors lead me to the conclusion that a Russian attack is in the realm of the possible, he said. Whether it will happen or not depends to a large extent on our own behavior. Russian oil on the agenda as Trump prepares to host Orban. Donald Trump, perhaps the key figure for any hopes of ending the war, is meeting Vladimir Putin's closest partner in Europe. Viktor Orban, Hungary's prime minister, will be the latest world leader to visit the White House today, and one item is likely to be top of the agenda. Russian oil is the one area where allies Trump and Orban have diverged, with the U.S. president urging Europe to end its reliance on Moscow for energy. But Budapest has pushed back against plans by the European Commission to phase out imports of all Russian gas by the end of 2027. Last month, Trump told reporters Orban has asked for an exemption on buying Russian oil. "We haven't granted one," he said, adding, "He's a friend of mine." Orban and his team have also often criticized Ukraine for its repeated strikes on Russian energy infrastructure. On his flight to Washington, Orban, who faces an election next year, described the topic of energy sanctions as serious, adding the stakes were high, in comments cited by state news agency MTI. "I know the president, he knows me, we know the subject, we simply have to reach an agreement," he was quoted as saying. The pair have a good relationship, with Budapest chosen as the host for mooted Trump-Putin talks, plans that have since collapsed.